I am Dungeon Thrasher Lenny Blade, and this is the Dungeons and Thrashers show, and more specifically, this is the Adventures in Middle-earth. That's right, and we have come all the way to take a deep dive into Rivendell. This is the most comprehensive region guide. So far, there is another one that comes close, maybe even surpasses it, but we will deal with this one later on. So, just like the other Rivendell, or just like the other guides, I should say the other region guides, this one comes with a companion piece, and it is the Eriador Adventures that is the companion piece to this one. And I would say that the Breland region guide is sort of a companion piece, because even though this is a much more zoomed in map, but the Breland is covered in this one as well, with a more zoomed out map, of course. And you know how regular people talk about being a dog person or a cat person. Well, Middle-earth fans talk about being a dwarf person or an elf person. And I'm definitely a dwarf person myself, so actually when this one came out, I got it on release, like all of these books. I got it on release, but I didn't read it until months later. Simply because I wasn't really interested in it, and my characters were far away from Rivendell. But when I did read through it, man, there is a lot in here. So I don't want this video to go on forever. So yeah, without further ado, let's get stuck in.
Alright, so we're back down at the table here again. And like I said, this is a more zoomed out map than that of the Breland region guide. So, you know, but you still deal with, you know, the Barrow Downs and Bree and so forth, but you also get, obviously, Angmar, Tharbad, Dunland, Eregion, the Caradhras, and obviously Rivendell itself, and, you know, Goblin Town and everything, but some of these are actually more detailed in the Eriador Adventures companion piece to this. But the guide wastes no time getting into details on Rivendell, as the very first chapter of the guide properly covers Imladris, 21 pages of elven information. So if you are an elf person, this is definitely for you. We got maps, detailed descriptions. First of all, Rivendell is hard to find for the players, even in the company of an elf or a character with the elf friend title. The company needs to pass a DC 15 survival check and a DC 30 survival check if no elves or elf friends are in the company. And because Rivendell is protected by Elrond's ring, Vidia, the blue ring, I believe, it's supposed to have been the strongest ring. Now, and it was never assaulted as far as I can remember now. I may be wrong. I never do research for these things. But Lorien was attacked 3 times, and they managed to repel. The elves managed to repel all the assaults, all the invasions. Probably a lot thanks to Galadriel's ring. But I think I read somewhere that Elrond's ring was supposed to be the strongest one of the 3 elven rings. And I think that's also why its protection is so powerful, that it just cannot be found, almost, if you're not an elf or an elf friend. And this is also reflected in the mechanics. If you take the heal corruption undertaking, for example, if that is undertaken in Rivendell, the character gets 2 checks for the price of 1, and the recovery undertaking removes all exhaustion levels and replenishes all hit dice and hit points and removes all conditions. And one thing I found interesting is that characters aren't allowed to level up if they spent any time in Rivendell during that session, but instead they level up after spending at least a session's worth outside of the valley. And you know, they explain this as heroes who stay in Rivendell forget their worries and concern and may get too comfortable, neglecting their duties and responsibilities and whatnot. I think it's an equalizer, because Rivendell is a very powerful and advantageous sanctuary So this ensures that the company and the players don't just overuse that location and just spend all the time there, because it's better than most other sanctuaries. Anyways, detailed elves include Elrond, of course, Constitution 12, Arwen, Glorfindel, which roles were a little bit confused in the Peter Jackson movies, by the way. But anyways, we're not here to talk about that. Also Asfaloth, which is Glorfindel's horse, Erestor, which is a very powerful healer, which whose herbs and tonics could be available to the company, and his medical tonic doubles the effects of a short rest. So that's pretty cool. And also he has a traveling cordial that removes 1d4 levels of exhaustion and replenishes 1 hit die per sip. Though it is considered too potent to take more than 1 sip a day, as you can imagine. There's also Lindir, Damron the Smith, Elrohir, and Eladan. There's information on the White Council as well. And finally, there are a couple of new fellowship undertakings. And also how Rivendell affects the regular undertakings that I've talked a little bit about already. So the two most interesting new fellowship undertakings is There and Back Again and Write a Song. So the There and Back undertaking can be undertaken if a character returns home and spends an entire season, which is usually the case during winter, the fellowship phases in winter, without going out on an adventure. Spending time in front of a cozy hearth with his loved ones confirms that all his efforts are not spent in vain, and he is reminded of what he is fighting for. During the next adventure phase, he can grant himself inspiration a number of times equal to half his proficiency rounded up. However, there is a deal breaker with this one. Staying with one's family also reminds an adventurer of what he would lose should the shadow prevail. And he gains 1 permanent shadow just for taking this undertaking. A little harsh, maybe? I would equalize this by simply letting the hero inspire himself according to his full proficiency bonus, not halved. But that's just me. And writing a song is an undertaking that is just so gloriously Tolkien-esque. So you have to make the performance check is DC 17. And this is to write the song, unless you are in Rivendell or you have the minstrel trait, in which case the DC is 15. Now, the DC of performing the song later depends on the success rate. If you compose the song with a regular success, the DC is 15. If you succeed by 5 or more, the DC is 13. And if you succeed by a natural 20, that means that the DC is 10 to perform. So you write the repertoire down somewhere, so the party has like a repertoire of songs that you can choose from. There are 3 different kinds of compositions. Traditional, which is while anyone in the party can try to perform the song, the performance check is made with disadvantage if the performer isn't of the same culture as the composer. So for example, if the elf has written a song for the party, and then when you sing the song, you all make a performance check. But all the ones who are not elves does it with disadvantage. So that's what that means. There's also a thematic song. And these songs can only be performed if certain conditions apply. So there are like supper songs, drinking songs, walking songs, forging songs, songs of victory, and, whatever you want. The final kind of song that you can write for the party is the Elvish songs, and these are more difficult to compose, and they come with a +2 DC to compose. The difference is that Elvish songs can be performed twice during an adventuring phase. So how you perform is the companion choose a song from the party repertoire, and then they make a performance check each one. And for every success, there will be a D4 in sort of a dice pool that the party can use, a common dice pool. So you can add it to a skill check, attack, or a saving throw. Following this, there is a history of Eriador, not super useful, but a good read nonetheless. And that's followed by the region guide proper, so we got combat scenery, wildlife, inhabitants, notable places and characters. And, this includes the Trollshaws, Coldfells, Ettenmoors, Mount Graham, Weathertop, Barrow Downs, Angmar, including Carn-Dûm, which is pretty cool. That's the citadel of the old capital of the Witch King, which not even the Rangers have explored, so it's completely unexplored. And at the time of Adventures in Middle-earth, in this timeline, orcs and hillmen and trolls have started to return to Carn-Dûm, as if they were summoned by something or someone. So that's some cool adventure seeds right there. There's a chapter on how to make your adventures, your adversaries, even more powerful in the guise of especially strong abilities. For example, Fearsome, which allows a creature that's been struck by a hero to let out a fearsome yell, and the hero must make a DC 15 wisdom saving throw or become frightened for a whole turn. Now, there are exceptional troop abilities, of course, like Formidable, which grants all the members of a troop a +1 to AC, quite powerful. There's also like a bestiary, and before the bestiary, or including in the bestiary, there's a lot of information about undead and Nazgul and their special activities and abilities and everything that they can do. And there are new monsters and bosses and mini bosses, including the Witch King, Constitution 21, the Lord of the Nazgul, and there are also something really cool. There are mechanics on how Morgul blades work. So if a hero struck by a Morgul blade must make a Constitution save DC 10 plus the damage of the strike, which can get quite high up there. If a hero is reduced to 0 or less, the saving throw is considered failed automatically. And what happens is that the blade has broken off into the wound, just like what happened to Frodo. This wound has to be treated by Elrond or a scholar familiar with the weapons of the enemy during a long rest. And if the wound is not tended to, the hero becomes sick and doesn't recover, and he will die within 12 plus wisdom modifier days in searing pain and rise later as a fell wraith. Even if the wound is healed, it never truly heals, or if it's tended to, it never truly heals. So the hero is still, like if he's in a blighted area or within sight of a ring wraith, the pain comes roaring back. And in mechanical terms, what happens is that the hero has to make a DC 15 wisdom save or gain a level of exhaustion. And on top of this is wonderful. On top of this, every year on the day of the original wound, the hero must pass a DC 20 wisdom or gain, get this, 1d6 plus 2 shadow points. Damn. This means that if you get struck by a blade and you fail that first con save, roll up a new character. But I would encourage you to play out what happens to the old character though before, because he would either go insane or turn on the party or commit suicide and whatever. But oh wait, there is one positive spin on this. Guess what? You have advantage on perception checks. Well, that makes it all worth it then, right? Anyways, after that there are some chapters on treasures and rules and mechanics for hoards, tainted treasure, and some random tables for magical treasures. Trinkets, precious objects like origin, the main material, form, craftsmanship, and value. Now this is very helpful if you're the kind of DM, or LM I should say, that I am, and you like to mix scripted events with the randomness. So I use these tables a lot. And there are some new enchanted qualities as well, if you remember the ones that I've talked about before. And there are also rules for how cursed items work and how to design your own curse, including a couple of examples like Enfeebled, in which a lore master chooses one single saving throw which is made with disadvantage while wearing the item or holding the item or whatever is the case. And of course the player doesn't know this, so it'll be like, okay, make a wisdom saving throw, you're at disadvantage. And they will be like, what? Why? Oh, I'm not saying, you're at disadvantage. And then they have to find out that it's because they're wearing that that cursed ring or whatever. Anyways, one of the big things in this guide is that they try to teach you, or they not teach you, they suggest you to make a magical treasure index. So having a pre-prepared magical treasure index will obviously let the LM simply look at the items suitable for any character, by looking at the index and choosing an appropriate one, instead of slowing the game down by rolling on random tables and so on. Even though I do like to do that as well, as I said. But it does include something really cool. It's a 7-page sample, including, a couple of indexes. But there's one for the Quest of Erebor, with the magical items available for Thorin, Bilbo, Fili, Balin, and Gloin. So that's pretty cool. Another big thing in this book that's also built upon in subsequent books is the Eye of Mordor optional rule. And basically this is an optional game mechanic that represents the player company of heroes' possibility to catch the awareness of the Dark Lord. So it's divided basically into two values, the hunt and the veil. And the main mechanic is that whenever the company performs something that might draw the attention of the enemy, an eye awareness check is made. And if this check fails, the company will experience what's called a revelation episode, which is something negative, of course. For example, out of the frying pan, which makes all checks of this particular situation are made with disadvantage. For example, a particular audience during a particular journey or an exploration or something like that. We come to kill, which is one enemy type faced in a single combat gained the no quarter trait, for example. There are tons of examples in the books, in the book of this. The DC of the eye awareness check is dependent on the composition of the party and rises with certain actions taken by the company, like displays of magical powers or using certain virtues or wondrous or legendary items and so on. And the veil score is basically the modifier that you add to that DC, to that D20 eye awareness check, as it's called. So... and of course, this depends on the composition of the company. So, for example, a group of woodmen traveling at the edge of Mirkwood wouldn't attract the attention of Sauron, obviously. But a couple of high-elves traveling close to Mordor, then, the eye would start searching and investigating, and that's what this represents. I'm not going to go into detail on how it works, but I haven't used it yet in any of my campaigns. I think the lore master has enough to think about than introducing an optional rule like this, but it is a cool rule. I think it could work. I haven't tried it out yet. Not very surprising, we have the High-elves of Rivendell culture, which is a new culture you can choose from as a player. And aside from being basically an elf, there are some differences. These elves have proficiency in the corruption saving throw. They have the ability to see ghosts, spirits, and ring wraiths, which are unclad and unseen, which would be invisible to any other culture. Also, when they take the heal corruption fellowship phase undertaking, they automatically gain one permanent shadow point, and they lose one temporary shadow point. So it's a little bit different there. The most interesting of their cultural virtues would be the Artificer of Eregion, which lets the player choose the new fellowship undertaking, Elven Smithing, which in turn lets you enchant or enhance weapons and armor and things like that. So, in addition, there's also some new journey event tables and so on. So, basically, I would recommend this book to anyone, even if you're a dwarf person. I would recommend this book. So, buy or die, or something like that. See ya!